Historic First Africa-Caricom Summit held this Tuesday, aimed at promoting closer collaboration between both regions and their institutions. Protests in over 200 cities of Brazil on its Independence Day. Different sectors demonstrate against President Bolsonaro. Pro-government demonstrations are also expected. The Taliban dispersed an anti-Pakistan protest in Kabul, firing against a crowd of protesters and arresting journalists and other civilians. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, this is from the South. I'm Ray Gomez. We begin with the news. The historic First Africa-Caricom Summit was held this Tuesday via conference and assured by the President of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta. Video conference, I meant. The summit aimed at promoting closer collaboration between Africa, people of African descent, and the Caribbean and Pacific regions and its institutions. Their main goals have been promoting ties and engagement between its peoples, addressing the economic and communication challenges, fostering the continent-to-continent integration, assessing the progress in the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, and launching of collaboration between African and Caribbean regional continental organizations. The President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, spoke on this historical occasion about the spirit of the event.
We must become the architects of our common future, where Africa and the Caribbean are joined together by a common goal of ensuring that our peoples have prosperity.
In the Africa-Caricom Summit, the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holmes, expressed that the relationship between regions can truly grow stronger with mutual economic and social benefits.
Sports, culture, education, tourism, and the commerce between our regions to improve economic benefits and enhance people-to-people connections.
Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, also addressed important issues of common interest in the summit that was held via a video conference and streamed live through several platforms.
And almost 60% of North Americans are fully vaccinated. Only 3% of Africans can say the same. This pattern of inequity is obvious in its ugliness and prevalence. Therefore, we must act together to change it.
In the joint summit, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, expressed his country's will of collaborating for the improvement of life conditions and development in both the Caribbean and Africa.
The time has come for us to build institutionally a mechanism for the practical realization of the agenda which has been outlined in the concept note to the summit.
And the President of Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera, also intervened as one of the leaders of the African nations that participated in the summit.
Africa-Caricom Summit as another milestone towards the creation of a grand coalition of like-minded and like-mannered nations. Beyond embracing and celebrating it, we fully intend to leverage the opportunities.
In other news, on Monday, the Congress of Guatemala invalidated the state of calamity imposed by the President Alejandro Yamatei on September 2, 2020 to prevent the extension of COVID-19 infections. With 81 votes in favor, the legislative branch left the government decree 80-2020 without effect. The edict issued by Yamatei stipulated the establishment of a 3-day state of calamity, along with a curfew that lasted from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. to president carried out the measure after confronting the Ministers' Council seeking to prevent an increase in COVID-19 infections. The virus has infected or impacted the country with fierceness in the latest months. However, the opposition groups in Congress joined forces to rescind the device, although criticized for allowing the government to make state purchases with more freedom of movement, or according to some experts, giving the government a margin to commit illegal acts. In Mexico, 2 people died in the municipality of Zacatepec due to heavy rains. In addition, the General Hospital also suffered damages. Authorities reported that a 17-year-old girl and a 73-year-old man had lost their lives. The former after an electrical discharge caused by lightning, while the latter died after being swept away by the current. Heavy rains affected 19 neighborhood streets and main avenues in Ecatepec, a neighboring municipality in the northern part of Mexico City. According to estimates by the authorities, more than 100,000 people were affected by the storm that lasted about 2 hours. We'll be right back after this very short break. Welcome back. Over 160 cities in Brazil are the centers of mobilizations opposing the government of Jair Bolsonaro as the South American giant celebrates its Independence Day. Protests against the president are being called on by the national campaign for Bolsonaro out, integrated by the fronts of Povo Simado and Brasil Popular, alongside political parties, workers' unions, and civil movements. The campaign that demands that the chief of state's also join the excluded people's cause on the 199th anniversary of the country's independence. The protest agenda runs parallel to the shout of the excluded, the pronouncement of several social organizations against Brazil's most urgent problems, demanding respect towards the rights of minorities and vulnerable communities. Our correspondent Brian Muir has the latest developments on what Brazil is experiencing today. Brian?
I'm currently standing parallel to the Esplanade, which is where all of the federal government ministries, Congress, Senate, and the Supreme Court are located in Brazil's capital city of Brasilia. Now, for the last couple weeks, tension has been building up between Bolsonaro supporters and the Supreme Court, and more calls have been made with more and more escalating levels of violence to shut down the Supreme Court or to impeach some of its ministers, or even in some cases there have been death threats made against some of the ministers. Buses have come in from all across Brazil. The crowd on the Esplanade is huge. There's hundreds of trucks. Last night, the trucks broke through the barricade guarding the Esplanade. They didn't manage to breach the security around the actual Supreme Court building and the presidential palace, but it looks like there's at least a possibility that that could happen today.
Thank you. The Venezuelan government and opposition sectors have reached two partial agreements during the second round of talks in Mexico City. In a joint statement following negotiations, both parties agreed on 2 key points. Social measures, particularly on those affected by COVID-19, and the defense of sovereignty on the Guiana Essequiba claimed territory. Representatives from government and opposition said that talks on economic and social measures, including special drawing rights with the International Monetary Fund, would continue the next round.
Is that which refers to the ratification, defense and sovereignty of Venezuela over Guyana Essequiba, a profound declaration of support, respect for history, to the right that our homeland has since the times that we were a captaincy general to the territory of Guyana Essequiba, and emphasizes that it is the Geneva Agreement of 1966, the only instrument that Venezuelans know to settle amicably with the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. The first
President Pedro Castillo announced that a production plant of the Russian anti-COVID-19 vaccine Sputnik V will be installed in Peru. The head of state explained that the initiative's purpose is to fasten the vaccination process in the country, while honoring the agreement made with the Russian government. Castillo added that he expects the arrival of 12 million vaccines this month, with which 50% of the population can be immunized. With this in mind, the executive disclosed the arrival of a lot of Sinopharm and Pfizer vaccines. The mandatory included in his brief that they issued $705 million to face the third wave of the pandemic, which authorities estimate will leave around 67,000 and 115,000 deaths. Venezuela received a shipment of second doses of the Russian vaccine Sputnik V on Monday. President Nicolas Maduro also reported that the vaccines acquired through the COVAX mechanism will arrive this week. The government is hopeful that by October, COVAX will have delivered the more than 6 million vaccine doses. The shipments were delayed due to the U.S. sanctions, resulting in payments being blocked. However, despite these obstacles, 30% of the population has been vaccinated. The vaccination campaign has been extended with the aim of reaching 50% of the population fully vaccinated by the end of September. Italy's health minister claimed that the two-day meeting of his G20 counterparts had resulted in commitments to help poor nations obtain more COVID-19 vaccines.
The strongest countries, starting with those of the G20, are committed to allocating significant resources and also to send vaccines directly to the most fragile countries. This is already happening. Our country is doing it and has made some specific interventions, and other countries are doing it. We must further strengthen this system, which is both bilateral, with some countries deciding to intervene, and through the international instruments that have been put in place, starting with COVAX.
And China has expressed hopes that the United States will support instead of disrupting international cooperation in the fight against the COVID-19, as well as investigation into the origins of the virus.
COVID-19 response and origins study both call for solidarity, cooperation, and the spirit of science. Unfortunately, some in the United States have time and again tried to politicize efforts on both fronts to deflect the blame for their own botched response. Such irresponsible behavior has not only cost the American people dearly, but also become the greatest obstacle in international cooperation in combating the virus and tracing the origins. As we speak, the new wave of COVID-19 is still raging across the world. It is hoped that the United States can heed the objective and rational voice from the international community, seek solidarity instead of confrontation, take responsibility instead of resorting to blame shifting, be guided by science instead of politics, and support international cooperation in fighting the virus and tracing the origins instead of disrupting relevant efforts.
We have more stories coming up after this financial break. Welcome back. The situation in Afghanistan continues to worsen. On Tuesday, the Taliban dispersed an anti-Pakistan protest in Kabul, firing against the crowd of protesters and arresting journalists and other civilians. Our collaborator, Bakr Yunus in Pakistan, has more.
Internal tensions in Afghanistan are on the rise, as the Taliban movement banned the Afghan media from publishing the call for resistance against the Taliban, which Ahmed Massoud, leader of the so-called National Resistance Front against the Taliban, had launched. The Taliban movement also further prevented former Afghan President Hamid Karzai and former chairman of the Supreme Council for National Reconciliation Abdullah Abdullah from meeting with citizens, in an effort by the Taliban to establish total control over everything issued by Afghan leaders and to be able to control the internal situation, as explained by senior Taliban officials themselves. The Taliban had announced that their forces had imposed their total control over the northeastern province of Panjshir, a stronghold of the anti-Taliban forces until then. Massoud, for his part, responded by calling on all Afghans to rebel against the Taliban and accused the movement of receiving support from unidentified foreigners. In the meantime, there was an announcement from the Union of National Resistance Forces headed by Ahmed Massoud, stating that their forces have not been defeated, but that they are adopting a new method of resistance against the Taliban movement. These circumstances have become worrisome for neighboring countries, especially China, which is seeking to find stable ground in Afghanistan in order to extend its economic projects there. Strategic research centers have made it clear that China seeks to advance and lift the Afghan economy by extracting precious metals from the earth, such as lithium, the natural stock of which lies in Afghanistan and is the second largest after Bolivia. The Taliban spokesman had made it clear that the leaders of their movement believe that China has already become Afghanistan's major partner at various levels, especially economically, but most likely China's main role in Afghanistan will be concentrated on development and infrastructure building. At the same time, observers point to two potential problems that China could face: the refusal of foreign countries to allow the Asian giant to monopolize Afghanistan's lithium reserves, and the lack of guarantees demonstrating the possibility of improving living standards only through mineral extraction without developing other sectors of the economy such as production and technology.
Thousands of women also demonstrated in the streets of Kabul and Mazar-e-Sharif, northern Afghanistan. Women's rights advocates called for freedom of expression and the inclusion of women in Afghan politics. In particular, they called for representation in the next government.
Why are our women not included in the political issues? When they say we are having talks and they are voting for the formation of the new government, there is no any women anywhere in their voting campaign. Why they don't want to have a woman as a representative of all women in their voting and talks or to participate? We demand the creation of secure jobs, both for women and men, and on the rights to participate in politics for women, the rights of election and selection of women to leadership positions, the right to private ownership, working rights for women in the judicial and legal sector, the right to freedom of speech, and the comments of ideas of women must be safe. The upcoming new government must release a clear description of women's rights in the Charter of the Islamic Emirate.
In other news, on Tuesday evening, the Israeli regime launched new airstrikes over Palestinian territories. Israel's military forces launched missiles against the city of Yunis, south of Gaza Strip. In response to the attacks, Palestinian resistance fighters fired shots against the covered airships, which flew at a large scale and low altitude over the coastal area. Tel Aviv affirmed that the attacks targeted facilities of the Islamic resistance movement Hamas, which had supposedly thrown fire balloons over to Israel, according to the country's authorities. The new aggressions come after 6 Palestinian citizens managed to escape Israeli captivity on Monday. And the military committee ruling Myanmar released an ultranationalist monk who had been temporarily imprisoned since November 2020. That monk is Wiratu, a leading voice for Buddhist partisans who opposed Muslim advance in the country, known for his public incitations to violence and to stir up ethnic and religious conflicts. A spokesperson of the military government confirmed that the charges against Wiratu were dropped. He had been accused of sedition by the overturned rule of Aung San Suu Kyi. Wiratu also supported the military operation that in 2017 led over 700,000 Rohingya to flee to Bangladesh. Myanmar's different Buddhist groups are divided ever since the military junta was installed on February 1st. While some monks back up the military decision, others defend the previous government and have joined the protest opposing martial ruling. Coup leaders in Guinea confirmed the release of the select prisoners and the removal of the roadblocks in Conakry, the capital.
The President of the National Council for Recovery and Development instructed the Secretary General of the Ministry of Justice today to contact the Prosecutor General's office, the prison administration and the lawyers in order to make a thorough analysis of the file of political prisoners for their release as soon as possible. It is also ordered to the commanders of the units in the capital to make all arrangements to dismantle the APs from 6 a.m. starting tomorrow until further notice.
The leader of the opposition, Cellou Dalein Diallo, has offered the coup forces that overthrew President Alpha Condé the support of this party to build an appeased democracy. According to local media, Diallo concurred with the principles of the coup forces made public during the taking of power led by Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya and the National Committee for Assembly and Development. Diallo encouraged coup leaders to set as a priority the setting up of legitimate institutions with the power to make reforms that can lead the country to national reconciliation and back to the rule of law. Alpha Condé, who governed Guinea since 2010, was overthrown and detained last Sunday by members of the Army Special Forces commanded by Doumbouya, who justified the coup as a step toward creating the conditions of a lawful state.
The ANAD urges the CNRD to include in its priorities the setting up of legitimate and democratic institutions capable of implementing reforms that will rapidly lead the country to national reconciliation and the establishment of the rule of law.
And the United Nations informed that at least 708,000 people have been displaced in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the last 3 months amid constant encounters between the army and rebels. A UN official reported that 700,000 of those displaced since June this year are in Beni and 80,000 in Masisi and the surrounding areas in the eastern province of North Kivu. Susanna Tlalek, a humanitarian coordinator, assured that many of the displaced lost their families, spouses, and or children and are in an extremely vulnerable situation. Tlalek also affirmed that the humanitarian community has lost at least 5 workers, while others have been kidnapped or injured since early this year due to the constant challenge to access to displaced victims represents. We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I am Ray Gomez. I thank you for watching.